and welcome back to Why This Film, the podcast where we reach back into your childhood, pluck out a movie, give it a rewatch, and have a chat about it. I'm Emily Slade, and welcome back. You watched it so many times before, and now you're gonna watch it again. But it's been so many years since you last saw it, and now you show it to your friends, and they're like, what?
What am I watching?
Why this film? And it is so exciting today. We are reaching back double time because it's me and it's Corey.
Hey, how's it going?
And we're back together and we're revisiting. Oh God, it's so exciting. My intros for these Legend episodes are so bad because I'm just like, we are reunited 4 months later to talk about Legend, the director's cut, the extended edition, the magical Blu-ray that we both immediately ordered after recording the previous episode, which was such a beautiful moment. Corey was like, we should just do it. We should just do the extended edition. And I was like, oh, this is the best idea I've ever heard. I'm so excited. I'm so happy that I have fulfilled a live stream now, thanks to you.
I'm happy that I have the complete puzzle, I guess, that is Legend. You know, like I have all the pieces now that I can actually make a more proper, opinion on the film as a whole, or should I say the experience, maybe. But yeah, we'll get into all of that, of course. But thank you so much for having me back on. You say 4 months ago we recorded Legend. It could have been 4 years ago. Yeah. This year has been so insane. Time has no meaning anymore. And I'm sure people are going to listen to these episodes like back to back, or close to each other. And for me, I'm like, oh crud! I wish I had like sort of watched the theatrical cut closer, because while I'm watching the extended cut, I'm trying to remember sort of what's different, and I don't have as many like fingers on what is different, but I do have the feeling. I know what feels different about it, and like I said, we'll get into all of that too.
Yeah, that's so interesting to hear, because I was thinking that, because I was watching it and I genuinely forget how much I know this movie literally off by heart. So I was watching it and like my head was doing the normal dialogue, and then it would throw like an additional line, or like they would say it in a slightly different way, or something that like my obsessive weird head was able to pick up. But I was like, God, Corey's only seen this like once. Like, he's not going to remember these really bizarre intricacies that you're picking up. Like, oh, Maya, you did a different take, and the camera angle's a little bit different there, huh? Nice.
I was, though, picking up on I mean, I don't know where you want to start, because I feel like this is so different than your normal show, because like we kind of got all of our thoughts on Legend on the other episode, but yet we didn't, because it's just a completely different experience. But so I guess I kind of want to start with my overall thought of it, and then kind of like work backwards. I was telling my wife this morning, I was like, the difference between the two films is like the director's cut is about close to 2 hours. The theatrical cut's about an hour and a half. And I said to her what it really feels like is the director's cut is a proper story, whereas the theatrical cut is a dream of that story, or a dream of what you experienced versus what you read about. The director's cut is a more proper movie. It feels more like a movie. It doesn't have the same dreamlike quality to it. And I know that that's a bit abstract, but I will say, to kind of prove that point, even though it's longer by 30 minutes or so, I feel like there's less slow motion in the director's cut. Like the theatrical cut, especially the beginning, is so slow, but not in a bad way. Like just the movements are slow. It's a lot of slow motion. It's very dreamlike. There is not a lot of setup to it. But this one gives you all of those pieces that you're missing, but lacks the charm of the theatrical cut. I think it lacks
Yeah.
the beautiful dreamlike thing, even though it's weird. It's like the same sets, it's obviously the same cinematographer, it's the same director, but the editing, it's such a differently edited movie, you know, and I don't know if a lot of that slow motion was done in post-production for the theatrical version or whatnot, but it's so much more dreamlike in the theatrical cut.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. I really do. Like, we were basically, you're right, we've got an additional 30 minutes, and with that, they basically just flesh out and pad out characters and situations a little bit more, just a little bit more, like really nothing much. We get a bit more with this character and a bit more understanding of that character, and because of that, as you say, it feels more sort of legit. It's like a box instead of a cloud now.
Yeah.
It's like, here's our completed movie.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see why someone like we mentioned in the other episode, Tom Cruise tells people to go and watch the director's cut because he was unhappy with the theatrical cut. It's so interesting because from an actor's point of view, in terms of like, you won't understand my performance if you don't watch the like full movie. You need to go see the full movie, and the director's cut is the full movie. But in terms of a filmic experience that's sort of a bit offbeat and really enjoyable, the theatrical cut really gives us a vibe that is not really like much else that you see in a sort of trying to be mainstream fantasy. Like, obviously there's a billion movies out there that succeed in being dreamlike and intentionally so. I think what was wonderful about Legend was that it wasn't necessarily meant to be. And what it was meant to be was what we see here, where because the characters are fleshed out a bit more, they bring us a bigger understanding. Ridley Scott's whole thing was, he was like, I've got these characters and they're not 1D, they're not even 2D, they're like fully understood characters who have flaws. They're fantasy characters that have flaws. And we see Lily is more bratty and greedy, only subtly.
And I noticed that in the scene where she meets the unicorns, or kind of like when she's about to go to the unicorns, there was a different cut, like I think on her face, not a cut, but like an edit, and she felt a little bit less likable in this version, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if it's kind of in line with Ridley Scott's viewpoint of wanting to take hard, like you said, very glittery fantasy, you know, very just at its core fantasy, but But that only applies to the theatrical cut, because now it doesn't feel like pure fantasy, because fantasy is very black and white, you know, or at least the kind of fantasy that we, you know, tell our kids in order to tell a tale or have some sort of cautionary tale or whatever. But I get where he's coming from, where, yes, I do think it's correct. Like, Jack is more fleshed out. Yes, I think Mia Sara's character is a bit more realistic. They are all more realistic. The Gump introduction scene I actually enjoyed more. I liked seeing all the elves and the fairies kind of closing more in on Jack, where I don't feel like there was that element of danger in the original cut. I felt like there was more of an element of danger from the Hilda folk, you know, and everything. It's so weird. It's really so weird, because I like what they fleshed out, and I like that knowledge, but I like the experience of the theatrical cut better, you know, but I do like the themes that they're playing with in the director's cut. I do like the world being fleshed out more, especially the Bog Witch I felt was a bit better, right? He didn't woo her with the reflection as much, did he?
Yeah, I thought about you when that was on. We get way more of Meg, whatever her second name is, where alongside, because in the original one, in the theatrical one, Jack is like, look at your reflection. And then as she hangs the shield up, he decapitates her.
Yeah.
In this one, we spend a lot more time with Meg sort of being vain and being distracted, and Jack really fucking up, like dropping his sword in the lake and trying to, because in the theatrical he decapitates her and then he looks at his sword and he goes, I did it. But by this point, we've had no indication that he's not necessarily a hero.
Right.
You know, whereas in this version, we get to see him fumble and stumble and be like, shit, 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 the whole time. And so when he says, I did it, you feel like he's actually accomplished something rather than just had a mystical encounter with a bog witch and like, oh, yes, oh, we're doing some fantasy stuff.
Yeah, I that's the one thing that I absolutely love more in the director's cut than the theatrical cut, because she's such a cool looking character, and she's played so well by, I don't know if we talked about it last time, but if we did, it was a shock again for me to see that it was played by Picardo, he was in The Howling, and he was in Star Trek Voyager as well, but nice. I was surprised that it was played by him. But that's such a cool character. She's so gross and awesome, and everything in this movie is so well shot. The cinematography does not change in this movie from either version, and the cinematography from both versions is the star of this movie. But I'm just happy to see that scene longer, and it makes much more sense now than it did, especially considering that like I had seen so many pictures of that bog witch before, and then when we watched the movie, I was like, oh, that was pretty quick. Like that was like, I feel like that scene was like 3 or 4 minutes long, and now it's like almost like 8 to 10 minutes. It's almost double, it feels like, but it's very welcomed. And I also enjoyed more of the stuff with Darkness too. There seemed to be a smidge more with him.
There was. They sort of extended it a bit. They gave him a bit more to do. Darkness was a funny one because they kind of chopped up the scene that I gushed about last time with the dinner table and him and Lily. Him and Lily's conversation changes a bit because they add more stuff. But what they were adding was sort of... I don't know. Don't get me wrong. I really, 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 really love it. I do. I really love it. But I am getting older now. And in my old age, I'm a bit more, you know, when someone turns around in a movie and they're like, you are a feisty one, mistress, and I, you know, they talk like an incel on the internet, and you're just like, oh, shut the fuck up. There's a lot more of that with Darkness. There's a lot more of sort of like, you will be my queen, mistress. The night is where we shall belong, my dear. And it's like, he calls her a different name each time. And I was just like, no.
Well, this does come from the man that says like twice that sunlight is his destroyer.
Sunlight is my destroyer. And they put that in there because in case the audience forgot.
Right.
So then when Jack defeats him with sunlight, no one's sitting there going, oh. What I did love was when Jack does defeat him with sunlight, he monologues for a bit. Normally he gets shot out into space, but he has a whole thing where he's like, dude, you can't fucking kill me. Without me, there is no you. Yeah. I'm in you. We are brothers. Like full on jokering him with like, you complete me. He still gets yeeted into space, but you get the sense that it's not final.
Yeah.
There's no indication, there's no Godzilla eggs coming at you during the credits, but you're like, well, without darkness, there is no light. So if the light is still here, the darkness has to still exist somewhere. So like, you may have kicked him out of his rented swamp tree, but like, he's not gone forever.
Yeah.
You know, so watch out, kids.
And I did like that. I liked that monologue, you know, and I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. And I thought it added a nice layer to it. The whole concept that, yeah, you can never truly defeat evil because, you know, we need each other. What is the light without the darkness? You know, everything he says, it's very true. And I'm like, yeah, I like it. But at the same time, it felt a bit modern, like a modern villain sort of thing. Whereas again, in the original, much more dreamlike, much more of a true fairy tale, you know, like where you don't have every little bit of it explained to you, you know, and I'm happy that not every bit was explained here. Like we still have no explanation for like, you know, why what that, you know, chamber was with the armor and all that kind of stuff.
Where we are and what we're doing here.
And that's fine. That's great. I like not having all of those answers, you know, but yeah, it's weird because I'd say like it'll take 2 steps forward and then like 1 step back, you know, with how I feel about it, you know. I'll be like, oh yeah, I like this scene, I like that scene. no, I like the other scene better. And,
Yeah. Yeah, and I had that at places. I think I was just so overjoyed to sort of see the almost finished story as it was always meant to be. I was like, I wrote it down. It was like, what did I say? It feels less rushed. It feels like everything was given more time to breathe. You mentioned how we had more time in the world, and we really do. We spend ages walking down paths to get places where before we just got there. And I really appreciated that. We got to, when she first arrives in Darkness's house, she gets to really look around, and I was noticing things that I feel like I'd never noticed before, set pieces that I'd never really noticed before. I was like, oh my God, have those gargoyles always been on that fireplace? Like, I've watched this movie 100 billion times, and I'm seeing faces in walls where I never saw them before. And so just that breathing space of that sort of like, and now we spent money on this set, we're going to look at it. Whereas in the original, they sort of chop it all for time to get it down to that 1 hour 30. But you're right, as I've mentioned with the dinner scene, there were moments where I was like, you've kind of taken the sexy out of it a little bit. And
it wasn't as sexy. I think the whole movie here, the director's cut, didn't have as much of a sex appeal to it that I think that the theatrical cut had. And I don't know if that's the right way to go or not, because I don't know if she's supposed to be underaged and stuff so I don't know if that was like a good thing or not, but I do feel that there was a little bit less sex, but I do think that the princess was a bit more, she was more conflicted. I think you saw more emotion on her face in this one. I kind of felt like in the theatrical cut, she was a bit, she goes from being innocent to then all of a sudden having the dress on, and then she kind of like turns. Whereas I feel like in this, you got a sense of she was still sort of a bit of who she was under the glamour, like she was still sort of fighting it. Although, was the bubbling chair in the theatrical cut that she was going to sit on? She's like, I'm going to stand, thank you.
But it's very quick. It comes a lot earlier, and she sees the bubbling, and she's like, I'm going to stand. But in this one, when she usually says that, there's an extension of the dialogue, and it takes ages before she sits down. She's looking at the walls a lot more because there's the face in the wall now that wasn't there. The like green eyes in the wall. Okay.
So I swear I've seen that in the theatrical cut, but I thought that was Big D just talking, but it's not, or it is. I
don't know.
I think it's a statue of the darkness, but he can kind of go through it or see through.
Dad. Yeah, or like, is it like peepholes for the mansion? Or, because he's got those green eyes, but only sometimes does he have those green eyes. So I was like, is it him? Is it his dad? Because usually there's a bit where he's talking to his father, who we assume is Satan.
Well, yeah, of course.
In both versions, he talks to his father. And I'm going to have to go back, but I swear this was a change that I didn't like, because when Lily first arrives in the mansion, she's like slow motion running through like fire and corridors, and Darkness is being like, why am I so attracted to her? Like, she's super pure and innocent, and I'm like totally into that all of a sudden. And his father has this like deep, booming, satanic voice where he's like, you must make her one of us, woo her, charm her. And as he's doing this voiceover, she's like slow motion running in rags through fire, and it's very dramatic and it's very good. In this version, I could be making this up, but his dad's voice suddenly becomes
Blix.
More like Blix.
It becomes Blix's voice. I was like, why is Blix all of a sudden telling? Her. Yeah, why is Blix all of a sudden telling Darkness what to do? That was my takeaway, and I think. My guess is maybe Ridley Scott didn't like the idea of Darkness, you being able to hear Darkness's dad, so he just changed the dialogue to Blix. But why? Because Blix became very commanding of Darkness in that if that is Blix, right? If that is him.
And I don't think it is Blix. I think it's Blix's actor. because
Right,
Blix's
yes.
actor did a lot of the voices. She does Gump's voice, she does Blix's voice, and maybe at one point they were like, oh, can you just like stand in for darkness as well? And then when it became more of a stereotypical 80s fantasy movie in the theatrical cut, they changed it to sort of like how you would expect, like how everyone expected James Woods to be in Hercules. You come in and you're like, I am Hades, Lord of the Dead. But for some reason, they kept it. It's like they filmed Darth Vader and forgot to put James Earl Jones on top of it.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? I felt like someone hadn't done their job. I was like, I am completely taken out of this moment. It is not dramatic or sexy or fun. And I think that, because that is the build up to when it starts getting super oozy and sexy, when it's like, woo her, charm her, make her one of us. But when the voice is like, woo her, charm her, like from Animaniacs or something, I'm like, oh god.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even like she was trying not to be Blix, you know. It was like it was like Ridley Scott directed her, do Blix's voice, we'll augment it later, and then like you said, they just didn't augment it in this one. And I am 100% with you. I was like, I was watching it, stroking my beard, and then I'm like, wait a minute, I don't remember this. Like, this doesn't seem right. I'm like, is Blix telling him what to do? Blix all of a sudden like got all high and mighty on Big D like that? I'm like, nah, man, nah. And I feel like there was less Blix and his crew in this one. And maybe there wasn't. Maybe there was just, since there's 30 more minutes, the time in between their scenes kind of got like extended and everything. There's also like the horror elements, like the kitchen. I feel like, didn't the original movie start with the kitchen scene? Like, doesn't the theatrical cut start with like some gross kitchen stuff? Like, because I feel like you saw it before you saw it in the director's cut. Like, I feel like you saw it earlier on, and that the kitchen scene, especially like with them chopping up that still alive person in the background, is still pretty damn gruesome for like a fairy tale movie, you know?
Yeah. I thought it was a bit less. Normal.
But not nonetheless like gruesome, but still like I feel like that added to the sort of the fear of the first movie, the magic of the first movie. And then the family, Nell's family. Did we ever see them be like revived in the theatrical cut? Like, didn't we ever go back to them, see them? They were fine.
No, we didn't. Because we made a point about it in the last episode, where you just never find out if they were cool or whether they were just like lost in the old the freeze over of 2009 or whatever.
Yeah.
Remember when Princess Lily touched the unicorn and everything went to shit? Yeah, I lost my whole family that day, man. It's really sad. We don't like to talk about it.
I mean, there's still the shot of the frozen baby in the crib. I mean, it's a dark movie.
Milk-fed meat.
I know, that's such a great line. It's such a great line.
And what I love is that's the one who's pretending to be. He's like a brownie or a dwarf pretending to be a goblin. And I really noticed this time round that everything he says is so overcompensating trying to be a goblin. He's like, I just love milk-fed meat. Or he's like, oh, she was so sweet, I want to suckle on her bones. As if he's like, hey guys, I'm a goblin too. Oh, I love eating the humans, I do. Nom, nom, nom. Like, really trying too hard.
I still like how he gets dispatched though by darkness, or the mummy grabs him. He's like, adios amigos.
So good.
That one is still, I'm glad that like remains intact, you know.
And a lot of it did. A lot of the sort of good humor was there, and anything that was taken away, I think, worked in its favor. And I'm not sure that much was taken away.
No, if anything, I think there was more added to it.
Yeah. The biggest change is the ending.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that with the whole, like, so in the original, the theatrical cut, it's like, it's very much Jack and the princess are off into the future together. Whereas I actually kind of like this one where she's like, oh, what a crazy dream that was. So I'll see you tomorrow. Like, you know, like her world just kind of goes back to normal, but Jack is still sort of there, you know, and whatnot. I like that.
I really loved it. It was a proper full-on extended conversation. When in the theatrical one, she wakes up and he's just like, "Hey, I got your ring. That means that we're married, right?" And she's like, "Yeah, I love you." And he's like, "I love you too." And they literally run off into the sunset. They literally run off into the sunset. In this one, she wakes up and she's like, "God, I had the weirdest dream." And he was like, "Ha, yeah, a dream." And she's like, "It was a dream, right?" And he's like, "It's over now." And she's like, "That's not answering my question." And he's like, "Shh, shh, 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 you're safe, you're safe." And she's like, "Okay, all right. Okay, well, what I did learn, Jack, is that you belong here in the forest," which
Yeah.
I thought was so funny because maybe she's coming full circle with the conversation she has with Nell at the beginning where she's like, "Princess Lily, you should be finding a white knight on a beautiful horse or whatever," and she's like, "But no, I want to go on an adventure." And then she goes on her adventure and she wakes up and she's like, "You know what, Jack, you work really well in the forest and I'm gonna go back home and have a bath. How does that sound?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's fair. That's fair." And so she does. She's like, "I will see you tomorrow, sir."
Yep.
You keep my ring, so we don't have to deal with that. And I'll call you. I'll call you later. Okay, see you later. Bye.
You and your unibrow can stay in the forest.
You and your rabbits can stay, and I'll be back eventually. And she goes home. She goes off back to the castle. And Jack is just like chilling in the forest and he sort of runs in her direction, but I don't know if I'm assuming that because it's so interesting. He runs, this is the same shot from the theatrical.
Yeah.
It's just like,
it's like the same set. Yeah, they just took Lily out of it. Yeah.
And so he runs off by himself and then starts waving at all the woodland creatures and the unicorns are there and they're safe and it's fine. And he runs off into the sunset by himself. And much like in the first one when I used to be like, "Oh, and they probably just went back to the castle and had a cup of tea and then like called it a day." There's no kiss, there's no implication. Well, there is a kiss, but there's no sort of severe marriage scene. Similarly with this one, I'm like, this could be like fucking Stand By Me, where like Lily never comes back to the forest and she never sees Jack again and she marries a king and like they just had a really wonderful weird time in the forest that one summer. Saw a dead body.
Yeah.
Were like changed forever.
And to coincide with, I guess, Ridley Scott's realistic version of a fairy tale, then this is kind of how it has to be, and also because she learned her lesson, she has to go back into her world and take her knowledge with her and, tell people about, what's going on in the woods and kind of like create this idea of folklore, without her. You always need somebody to basically survive the experience so they can go tell the story. But yeah, it's not as clean cut. It's not as like sweet and saccharine as the original one is, but I don't know. I think as an experience, I still like the overall experience of the theatrical one better, like it's more dreamlike. And at that point, I'm like, well, sure, I'll just have Jack and Lily be together. I was already along for the ride and I was already rooting for Jack to win. I liked it. I actually liked the way the theatrical cut ended that way. I thought it was kind of sweet. I mean, Jack fought hard for her,
Yeah, and it wraps it up neatly and it makes sense and they're both deserving. They've both gone through something and struggled. It's not been easy for them. But I think that's why I liked the director's cut more, because it's what I always wanted. I always like it when they're like, "Oh, you wanted the thing? Ayo, stripped out from under your feet." And this does it. When Jack runs off alone, I felt, it's going to seem so dramatic. When I was watching Legend, the director's cut, and I saw Jack run off into the sunset by himself, I felt like a hole in my stomach. Like I felt like it wasn't complete. Like I felt like they hadn't given me the satisfaction that I deserved from this story. And I love that. I love that missing piece feeling where I'm like, hey, happy endings aren't guaranteed. And actually, heterosexual romance isn't necessarily a happy ending. So...
I know that you like to describe the theatrical cut of Legend as being a very just like powdery, glittery fairy tale, like kind of folklore, like at its core, just really distilled down to its core. Do you feel that's the same descriptor for this, for the director's cut?
That's so interesting. Sort of. Like, it's still there. But as we've mentioned, because it's a little bit more... We talked about Legend being sort of grey with its intentions, but fundamentally, yeah, like fine powdered fantasy coke. But, like, this is much more grey. It's much more sort of Ghost World than Dragonheart. I don't know, like, it's like people don't necessarily get their way. People are kind of shitty sometimes. There's sort of more resolution, but there's also less.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really weird one. I still felt like I was in an absolute fantasy world. Perhaps more so. I know, like, the dreamlike quality's been taken from us, but I found my feet were more firmly in this world, and I really enjoyed that. So it didn't feel like I was just sort of visiting on a high. It felt like I was there more this time, and I really appreciated that. But in terms of it being black and white, it's not really. It sort of feels a bit more... I don't know. I really don't know how to describe it.
Oh yeah, for me it felt more solid. Like, I don't know what that means, but like it feels more solid. It felt more like a movie. It just feels like, okay, this is a structure. It's a 3-act structure. I know when things are coming, but with the theatrical cut, I didn't really know where things were going to go because it just kind of had dream logic just everywhere, and that was because of them cutting out 20 minutes. So you have to cut out all this stuff, so it feels like dream logic and everything. But it's weird because it's almost like the director's cut is Batman Begins, whereas the theatrical cut is Tim Burton's Batman, right? It's kind of like the same source material, but one is trying to have more of a loose interpretation of it, like Tim Burton's Batman, whereas one is trying to be very more just solid, but at the same time realistic. Like, how would this really be in real life? Sort of, like if this movie came out post Batman Begins, I think it would have leaned even more hard into the more like gray, realistic fantasy, but it's still like in the 80s, so we still haven't, I feel like we as an audience, we hadn't seen like super hardcore realistic, fantasy or sci-fi or comic book stuff. People have tried, but it's going to take a while for us to get there, so this still sort of toes the line. But I get where Ridley Scott was coming from, what he's trying to do. I think he was like, okay, I understand folklore as much as we can all understand it, but like, I get it. I get these movies, the grim fairy tale stuff, I get it, but at the same time, they're very loosey-goosey. They're kind of like, you're just supposed to accept things like this person just lives in the forest, like. And then I'm sure Ridley Scott was like, but what would that really be like to be Jack in the forest? You know what I mean? Like, even though he didn't go hardcore into like the Batman Begin realms of like really showing you what life would be like as, Jack in the forest. But I think that like Ridley Scott started doing that. And then he started thinking like, okay, but what would the elves be like? What would the Gump be like? Like, what would he really be like? I know what we understand and I know what folklore tells, but in folklore, you only get like maybe 1 or 2 lines about this character. He's like, I want to like actually explore the character, and I do think we got more out of the Gump in this one. I think we got a more rounded Gump. I liked seeing more of the hidden folk. I like seeing more of the fairies and stuff, especially when he gave Jack that riddle that he had to pass. And I like, while he was waiting, they were just, you didn't see them move, but they all just started encroaching closer and closer and closer. And I love the design of them. I feel like in this movie you got to see more like gnomes and more of the elves and stuff like that. And man, it's so cool. They went for like a very traditional look. Like even some of the women, like, they you could tell that the actress was pretty, but then they would give her that very ugly bulbous nose, to wear. And it's like, okay, it's like, I really felt like he wanted to be true to like the source material. And I know there's no source material. The source material is just folklore. Like he wanted to be true to like this sort of Germanic, fairy folklore. But at the same time, he wanted to be like, but what would it really be like if these creatures were really real? How can he wants to film it realistically. He wants to portray them realistically. And, I guess the nice thing is at the end of the day, he had enough material to create two movies, or the studio did, one that was dreamlike and one that was more realistic. But I think he accomplished what he wanted to do, I think, here.
Yeah, for sure. And it's really cool that we now get to choose which experience we'd prefer. And I think that the dreamlike one is probably a happy accident. I think that they just felt forced to chop it down to they took out anything that was vaguely complex or that wasted time, and by doing so they gave us this mismatch of like a trippy experience in the woods. Whereas when they added back in sort of like, okay, we're gonna go here and do this kind of vibes, it was, as you say, it's 100% more like a movie. And it was so interesting to me. It's like I'd been doing this puzzle over and over again, and like 3 pieces had been missing every single time. And then watching the director's cut, I finally had those 3 pieces. And I was able to see the jigsaw complete for the first time. And so there's a rush in that where you're like, oh my God, it's finally finished. It's finally finished. I can look at it. But you're so used to seeing the unfinished puzzle that you've sort of fallen in love with the unfinished puzzle. And you're like, there's more charm to that. And there's more, I love it. There's more nostalgia to it. So whilst I'm super pumped to now have the option to watch the full movie, and be able to notice things that I never noticed before, like the set pieces, we do still have the sort of injection of the theatrical cut where we can just be like, oh yeah, like, what's going on here? I don't fucking know, and I don't fucking care. This is great.
Yeah. And I think the theatrical cut is probably my preferred viewing at this point, but you're right. It's nice. We have 2 choices, and both movies are, I would say, good movies. Like, I like both movies. I think they're both well made. It's remarkable how different of an experience they both are, and what you're left with, how you're feeling. And it's more of an experience. Both of them, it's like, I don't think there's one right or wrong. It's which experience do you prefer? And exactly. I think, and having, which one do you watch first is probably going to dictate which one you probably like better. But
it's true.
You were talking to me offline, and apparently there was probably a darker version of the movie that didn't even get filmed, right? Because you sent me a page of the script where it's like, so apparently Lily is like being beaten at the beginning by some baron that she's maybe bequeathed to, or is that her father? I wasn't quite sure from the page, but it seemed dark and sinister.
It's mental. I talked about it briefly in the other episode. When I first got into Legend, I found the original. You can find the original script. By the what's his name? His name is like William Hodsberg, who wrote the screenplay for Legend, and you can find the original Legend of Darkness online. Legend of Darkness happened, and it was sort of based on all of this stuff. They turned it into the director's cut, and then they wanted to dumb it down almost and turn it into the theatrical cut. And I think that's why it feels more like a fairy tale that we understand, because it sort of had to go through this hacking process to be a bit more what we're used to. So then you go back and you go back again, and Legend of Darkness feels more like I'm reading The King's Damosel, or like an Arthurian legend or something, less rather than a fairy tale. Darkness is replaced, as you said, by a baron who just happens to be her dad's friend. Because we meet her father in this version. He's out hunting with the baron, who everyone says is an ogre. But he's not. He's just like a really shitty dude. She turns physically into a monster, which again harkens back to more sort of the original, what would they be? Some of the really old sort of, there are versions of Red Riding Hood where she turns into the wolf, Tiger's Bride, lots of fairy tales where the women turn into different animals kind of thing. But this is very, very dark about it, because as you said, it's also very, he has a whip and he like whips her until she bleeds, and that's like written in the script. It's very trying very hard to be like BDSM-y.
So wait, so is the darkness, is Big D not in it? Like it's the Baron, he's darkness?
It's the Baron.
Is he supposed to look any different? Is he like, do they describe him any different, or is there less like monstrous stuff in it, you know?
When we first meet him, he's got his face covered for a while, and they say he's an ogre. It's chunky. It's it's thick as. And I haven't got all the way through it recently. I was just flicking through. She's like turning into a literal animal, and he's like, ha, blah blah blah. We are all animals, my dear, blah 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 blah.
Yeah, he actually keeps that line in the movie too. Yeah,
which is really interesting because this is where it comes from, and in the movie, it's just sort of like she's like, you're an animal because I'm trapped in this dungeon and it really sucks, and you're like literal a devil. And he's like, oh, we are all animals, my dear. And it feels just sort of like, humans aren't that great either, hon, so maybe you should check yourself before you wreck yourself. In this, it's like a vile stone cellar, walls dripping with moss and slime, human bones litter the earthen floor, chains and shackles hang between the instruments of torture. There is an iron maiden, a rack, and a charcoal brazier heating various tongs and pincers. The whip cracks again as the shadow of the Baron moves across the wall. Princess Lily is chained to a stone pillar, clothed only in tatters, her glossy pelt striped with bloody welts from the lash. She huddles helplessly before the fury of the Baron. The Baron strikes again with the whip. Semi-conscious, Lily can do little more than whimper when she is hit. Baron. Your moans seem almost pleasurable, my dear, developing a taste for the lash. Lily, groaning, kill me, I want... So nice. Very different to the movie.
Yeah, that's dark.
It's cringy as well, with sort of how overtly pornographic almost it is. Obviously, as a 14-year-old, I was like, hello. But now as a 28-year-old, I'm a bit more like, are you okay, William Hortzberg? Maybe you should, get a girlfriend who's into it before bearing it all in a screenplay.
Right? I wonder if, did Tim Curry sign on when he read that script? Or, because, what we see is so dramatically different than that.
Yes, so different. But you can also kind of see where it came from. I mean, Darkness is in, that sort of bin bag, PVC outfit, and Lily gets put in a plunging neckline of a gothic what's the Hot Topic dress, but it came from a place of real sort of abuse, and I can't remember, but I feel like she fully turns and she fully goes over to the dark side in this, and Jack has to literally rip her back. And once he has done so, she's sort of changed forever a little bit, where she's sort of lost her innocence, as it were. Whether she actually loses her innocence would not surprise me in this version, which is really problematic for a lot of reasons. And I think if that movie had been made, I think it would be more the type of thing that would be covered on Podcasting After Dark, as opposed to Why This Film.
Yeah, I think
you and Zach would be like, oh yeah, man, remember when it was great.
I mean,
2 a.m.
You're not wrong. I mean, it sounds like it was destined for the sleaze pile, and then but it's also remarkable who reads these scripts and can see the other movie that's maybe in there and hidden, in there. But yeah, it's I'm glad we didn't get that movie, to be honest with you. I'm glad that we never see Lily's home life. I don't want to see it. I like not seeing any of the city, I love seeing just the countryside and everything. I think it's really cool. It lends itself to that, to just the whole dreamlike fairy tale of it, because also you can't really place it technologically where it would be, and I
Yeah.
feel like if you saw a big city, you could, okay, this takes place in the year,
Yeah.
whatever. It's
For
more
sure.
timeless now.
Definitely. And it's got that Shakespearean feel of like, oh, we're going into the woods. And like, whenever someone in Shakespeare goes into the woods, it's because they need to deal with some shit.
Yeah.
They're usually dressed as the opposite gender and they go in and they're like, right, let's sort this fucking shit out. And then they come out again and they're like, cool, done. And it's that Lily enters the woods and she has a fucking wacky adventure and then she goes home again without Jack. Jack is part of the woods. Jack is part of the adventure, which is why I'm always so unwilling to call him the main character. Even though he's our hero, I feel it's Lily's journey that we follow.
Oh, yeah.
And if I had to give it a main character, it would be Lily.
Oh, of course. I would not consider Jack. And honestly, I think it's smarter that he stays. Like it's the same trope as a samurai movie or a gunslinger movie or Mad Max. It's they can only do one thing. They're only good at one thing. They can't be integrated into society. They kind of go from town. You almost get an idea that Jack could be immortal. And he could go from woman to like he just could be having these adventures and with other people and stuff. But yeah, Jack is not built for the city. We even talked about that. I think the first time. Like, what would that? Yeah. What's their future really
they wouldn't
like here?
Have a future. They would have like a shitty sitcom future where they're both like depressed.
Yeah, because Jack would want to be out in the woods and she would. Yeah, it's. I think absolutely this ending is more truer to Jack's character than the other ending is. Although you could say the other ending maybe they just held hands till they got to that part, then they separated ways.
They said, bye,
whatever.
Bye.
Yeah, but
it's interesting that you say immortal. In the original script, he was meant to be. We're meant to find out that he is immortal.
Okay.
And you think of the sort of foresty folklore of England. There's a lot of the Green Man everywhere, like. And like I wouldn't be surprised if he's meant to be that vibe because he's Peter Pan without falling out the pram.
And which is interesting because then you also have the Gump. So it's like in my head, Jack is the Gump, but he isn't because you have the Gump and the Gump doesn't know Jack. So that always kind of that for me that makes it a little bit weird because I feel like why wouldn't Jack have ever met or run into the Gump or known him, Like, if he lived in the woods, he should know him.
But, like, if, let's say there's the woods, fucking Stranger Things, thank you for, like, being able to sum shit up, but, like, like, you ruined it.
Multiple dimensions.
So within the fairy rings, the sort of supernatural element of the forest lives, and in the forest, the sort of green man lives, the sort of jolly green giant who can interact with humans. And then if you look the second layer down, there's all the brownies and the elves that perhaps only come out at night, or perhaps can only be seen if they choose to show themselves, and like that sort of thing.
Or when the veil is thinner.
There are people that live in the forest, so we assume it's a fairly human domain. In the original script as well, Lily's like, I'm a princess, I demand that you show me the unicorns, and he's like, you are a commoner here, the true royalty are the unicorns, kind of thing. So it is a completely different domain to perhaps society, as it were, over where the castle is. But no, it's really interesting.
Although that's kind of, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that different hierarchy. Like, I actually find that to be kind of interesting, like the human hierarchy, and she's like, oh, but I am I am royalty, I am this and that. But there it's like, I don't care, it doesn't matter what the fuck you are back in the real world, like unicorns here are all that matters. Like, he does say that, but I think it's interesting if they didn't actually use royalty to the unicorns. They talked about more of like these beings, and which is weird because it's like the wording is supposed to make them seem bigger, but I felt like it made them seem more contrived. And I think if he used royalty, I actually would have liked that better, like the spiritual royalty.
Yeah, because he sort of, this time around, he mentions how her touching the unicorn put her immortal soul in danger, and I was like, what are they, gods now? Like,
and she's not supposed to touch them. She did. I think she's a dick. I think that's a dick move.
And she was always meant to be a dick. And I think that's why I always liked her as a kid, because I was confronted with this princess character who was flawed. She was fundamentally flawed. She was greedy, and she was bratty, and she was snobby, and she was bossy. And I was always like, fuck yeah, like a human woman on screen. Right. I love it.
And I should say that the fact that she is a dick, I don't actually find that dislikable. I actually find that interesting about her character. And I do like to see in this movie the different facets of her character, because, and I think it's important because to show that humans are different than, because even the fairy girl, she even says like, you know, your all's love is so fickle or what, she's something to that regard. Whereas the fairy love is strong and fierce. And I do think that Lily is supposed to be more gray, and her faults are supposed to be more apparent because she's human. I think we're supposed to see the difference between humans and fairy and elves and those guys and gals. Like, you know, they're immortal. They're more in touch with things. They understand things more. But at the same time, they're not. It's why in movies and everything, like, humans are always prized because we also have like free will, whereas they kind of have to live with the rules that they are under. They're extremely powerful, like the Gump and everything. They're all extremely powerful, but they're very bound by their rules. Whereas I think humans are always portrayed in folklore and movies and stuff as like, we have all that free will. We're so willful and prideful. We can do whatever we want and it doesn't matter. And yes, we do miss the little things. We miss the connection to the magical world that the Gump has, but at the same time, we're more free than the Gump is, you know? And it's cool though. It's cool to see, like, you can have a good character do bad things. Like, we're all good. Like, a lot of us are good people, but yet we still do bad things. We still do dick things. And so her touching the unicorn, I thought was, great. I mean, I like it. I like that she kind of, says, I'll do what I want, It's
absolutely
cool.
What's great is that it's a very simplistic, in theory, black and white fairy tale that we've been able to talk about for hours on end and still can, because it provides us with these complexities and it provides us with these sort of underlying thoughts without answering any question, that we're able to delve into the world and we're able to be like, ooh, like, actually I do sympathize with darkness, and actually, like, maybe this and maybe that person's kind of trash actually, and like, ooh. And I think you're absolutely right. I think if we did have a movie of the original Legend of Darkness, no, thank you.
It wouldn't have stuck around, like, I don't think, or in a different way probably.
Reading the original Legend of Darkness, completely different. Reading the original Notre Dame de Paris and watching the Disney's Hunchback of Notre Dame, completely different things. But I'm just so grateful that people are willing to give these darker tales and these horrific, real stories a chance for a new life, taking just little shavings off the top and breathing new life into them to give us a more fleshed out, brilliant, off the beaten track tale that we can still enjoy. I just really enjoy that. Yeah. No, I'm with you. I think it's super, super cool. And one thing that I thought was really cool about what they added back in, I believe they did, was how the Gump told time when they said, "Hey, let's all sync up our watches." Yes! I was like, wait a minute. I think I was taking a note and I looked up. I was like, I don't remember watches. And then like the Gump has like this globe with balls of water in it, and then the other guy had something else. I was like, oh, cool. I was like, oh, this wasn't in the right. I wrote it down as well. I was like, what? The clocks?
Yeah.
Like one of them has like a weird sort of clown clock face on like a pocket watch. He has a ball that has little engravings of like different animals. And he's like, we'll be back here in 200 beats of a hummingbird's heartbeat. And then when he comes back, he's like, 2 more flicks of a badger's tail and we'd have been done for. Because his little balls articulate alongside the images of these animals, and he reads time through woodland animals' internal organs or whatever. And it's just what a brilliant, gorgeous little addition.
Yeah.
I want one of those like Gump clocks.
Yeah.
Like, how gorgeous.
I mean, and it was such a beautiful effect too. Like it was really, really well done. Damn shame that didn't make it into the theatrical cut, because it's a fun little piece of I don't know,
mythology.
fairy tale tech. Yeah, weird.
Yeah.
And I will say the only other thing that kind of I felt like honestly they kind of pulled back on was the fairy being in love with Jack in the director's cut. I feel like that was a bigger deal in the theatrical cut than the director's cut. Maybe there was just less time, and they, like there's 25 minutes that are trimmed. If they kept every bit of. If you kept every bit of that weird little stilted one-sided love story, it would seem like more because you have less time surrounding it. So maybe it was just the same amount of time as it was before, but it seemed like in the theatrical cut, it was a bigger deal.
Yeah, I agree. I think from what I remember, I think that they don't add anything to it. They just...
So everything around it is just trimmed down. So
yeah, and it doesn't feel as important because there's more stuff happening. We've got longer conversations with other people that Una is just like there, and you're just like, okay.
And she seems to get over it pretty quickly after she has her gets upset. But yeah, maybe it's because there isn't there's more time around it that it feels less significant in the director's cut. But I did feel that. I was like, okay, almost to the point where like we didn't sort of like need this little bit, but yet I liked it in the theatrical cut.
Yeah, it sort of wraps up a bit neater in this one. I've just remembered they add like one line as she lets them all out of prison. She like shuts Jack back in very briefly, because then immediately someone else lets him go. But she's like, I could vex you, Jack. I could make you dance a fairy dance for eternity. And then she like storms off, and Gump is like, okay, we're just gonna let Jack out of the prison. Now let's go. But I loved it because it was just that more bitter spitefulness that really felt like she was sort of stamping down and being like, you know what? Fuck you. I'm over it. Yeah. More so than in the first movie, because it's not a sequel, the theatrical version, because we talked about it in the other episode where it does feel like she gets over it a bit, and I was saying she sort of goes off on one, and I think like Tinkerbell, who can only experience one emotion at one time, she's over it because she's like, well, you've filled me up with so much hate towards you now that I can't see you in any other way, so you can go suck a dick, even though it's completely her problem and Jack didn't do anything wrong.
But at the same time, I feel like that's kind of always been like you said, like it's a fairy thing. Like that is why they love us humans, is because we can experience this full array of emotions. And I think, like you say, everything they're feeling is just amplified they're always at 100. They're always going at 100, And, but I will say this, I will say this, she's a professional because she still did her job even after being shunned by Jack. So props to her. I want her on my team no matter what.
Yeah, she's legit. She finishes the job.
Yeah.
Also, what's interesting about fairy-human relationships is that often fairies are very aware that humans can die when often fairies can't. And so that's really interesting when you play with the fact that Jack may or may not be immortal. The Gump may or may not know this. And it's the Gump that's like, kill her, Jack. She means to do it. Kill her. Forget her. And it always rings with me, that line, because Jack then obviously makes the choice to be like, I trust you, Lily. I'll always trust you, and shoots darkness instead. But the Gump you really get the sense that he's immortal there, because the Gump it's more than just, oh my god, Jack, there's plenty more fish in the sea, because he's asking her to put an arrow in the heart of his beloved.
Yeah.
But he's then asking her to forget her, and the implication that I read into it is that you've got centuries. You will live forever. She will be a blip on your radar. She's gonna put us all in danger if you don't shoot her in the heart. I don't care for human lives because they're so fleeting. And then that also plays into the trope that vampires are always obsessed with humans because they're like, God, your life is so fleeting. Like, it's so cool that you're only gonna live like 100 years max. Like, you want to hang out kind of thing. So there's the two-way thing there as well, where the sort of fae, if you will, are always fascinated with humans because we're so weird in comparison to, as you say, these more rule-abiding creatures that are sort of more animalistic in the sense that they are sort of born to do something, they do it, and then they die. Or they don't die.
Yeah.
Whereas humans are like, as you say, we're like, I'm gonna be a fireman. A rabbit can't be a fireman. Well, I don't know. That's me assuming a lot about rabbit life.
Yeah. And you know, and what I liked also too about her name is Una, right? The fairy, the fae. Well, they're all fairies technically. But
Yeah.
that's semantics, I imagine. But you always got to figure they're not human. That's the thing. Like they don't. And I think they do a good job of like making her look otherworldly, you know, and everything. And I don't know. I like the idea that they may have a human face, but they're not human, and you can't relate to them, and they can't relate to you. Ultimately, at the end of the day.
Yeah, you really get that when she flashes back from pretending to be Lily in the jail cell, and then she flashes back to being Una. And she goes from Maya Sara's like lovely romantic brown eyes to these sort of like sharply Elijah Wood almost bright blue contacts, and they're really standing out in the literal like flash of light that happens when she transforms. And it's frightening because all of a sudden this wild hair and these bright weird eyes come through Lily's normal face, and you're reminded that you're dealing with something quite dangerous. Like she could fuck you up if she wanted to. Like
Yeah.
she could take you by the ankle and drop you off a mountain.
I recommend it. I recommend checking out Legend. You know, I recommended it before, but I think it's a beautiful movie. I think it's a beautiful movie, beautiful experience to sort of take in. The director's cut is a beautiful movie. The theatrical cut is a beautiful experience. But kind of tying it back into like bringing magic back in the world, I would almost want to show my kid the theatrical cut just to kind of have their imagination sort of run wild and kind of, you know, just I do still love that whole first act when they're in the woods. That it's a set. Clearly it's a set, but I love that. I love outdoor environments that are sets. They clearly look like sets. Yeah. I just love that. If that feels magical to me. And I think that whole opening act is just amazing. Nell's cabin, you know, is amazing.
I think it's a brilliant movie to show kids, and I would hope that they would, you know, if you show it to them young enough, it might be a little scary, but I think it'll...
Yeah.
I'd like to think that they would enjoy it. I'm so pleased that you enjoyed it. I'm so happy.
Oh yeah, it's so much fun. Like you said early on, we do have a clear picture now of the movie. I'm glad that I have a clear picture of the movie. But I think moving forward, I would probably watch the theatrical cut. I would smoke a fat joint, just get melted into the couch and just experience that movie. Just experience it, let it wash over you, and just absorb it, live in it. And then if you have any questions, go watch the director's cut afterwards and be like, okay, that's interesting. But I think the theatrical cut, I would start with the theatrical cut.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's very fair, actually, because it sort of wraps itself up nicely in how you would expect it to, and it makes sense in itself. And if you enjoy it, and as you say, you want more questions, go to the director's cut. And then you can pick which world you sit in. Do you want more answers, less answers, a happy ending, an ambiguous ending?
Yeah.
It's up to you.
I don't think that there isn't like one correct version of the movie. You know, I know Ridley Scott says it's the director's cut, but then you could even argue that, well, you fucked up with the Darkness is Dad Blix thing, so that's not even, it's not perfect anyways, you know. So, you know, it has its flaws too, but I think even though it's 2 hours, it actually feels like a pretty tight movie, you know. Like I think it moves along pretty quickly overall, but boy does that theatrical cut really just, I mean, you feel like you're in the current with it. You feel like you're a paper in the wind. You're just sort of breezing along with it. I'm not going to use Wash's example in Serenity because I don't want a giant harpoon coming through my window and killing me. I think the theatrical cut does feel like an experience, like a roller coaster. You're on it. You're not supposed to think about it. You're not supposed to question it. Just go with it. Whereas here, you can examine it. You can sit with it. You can be like, okay, this is what they meant to do. But the theatrical cut's a dream, and it's a beautiful dream.
I think you've just summed it up perfectly. It's literally perfect. I have nothing to add. What he said.
Good. I'm very happy we did this. I'm glad that we have both of them. I'm glad that I've seen both of them, and I'm glad that now, both of my thoughts are forever on here. And if anyone ever wants to know what I think about Legend, I will just direct them to you, to this to this podcast, and be like, here you go. Here's what I think about both versions of Legend.
Thank you so much. Like, I cannot express how much it has been like therapy to me to like sit down with someone who is so thoughtful and articulate and artistic, who is able to appreciate these movies in a way that I've been appreciating them for like 20 years, and no one was there for me, and now I feel like I've opened a door and I'm just like, there's people out there who agree with me. So this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much.
I always have a blast coming on here, whether we're talking about Tron or two different versions of Legend. I always have fun chatting movies with you, my buddy across the pond.
So where can we find your podcasts? Where can we find you across social media? Tell us about your podcast in case this is the first time someone's heard of you and they're like, who's this cool guy? What's he up to?
I hope you go back. First off, go and listen to our Tron episode, and then go and listen to our first Legend episode. I guess you could just listen to them either way, right? The director's cut or the theatrical, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Whichever one comes first. But yeah, you can find me all over the podcast sphere, I guess. You can hear me talking to our pal Zach on Podcasting After Dark, and it's a cult movie podcast. Actually, I mean, this movie is very Podcasting After Dark adjacent. It's around the same time frame, 1985 or 3, whatever it was. What was it? Legend, 85?
85.
Yeah. A lot of our movies on Podcasting After Dark are 1985. So we do cult movies from the 70s, 80s, early 90s, and usually the cult movies are like rated R. And then, of course, with our pal Adam from the Blast from Our Past, I have another podcast every week called Cartwright, a Seinfeld podcast. So we talk about Seinfeld every single week. And right now we are about halfway through season 5. So actually we are pretty much exactly halfway through the series. And that's with Adam, who Emily was on the Mummy episode of the Blast from Our Past. So you guys and gals, you heard Adam's voice if you listen to that episode. So me and him, we talk about Seinfeld every week. And I live on Instagram, so you can find me on Instagram. If Corey Nation is my personal one. And then but I usually live on the Podcast After Dark Instagram. So
you're welcome back any time you want, obviously.
I appreciate that. I love coming on the show. Just say the movie. Say the movie and say when. I'll be there.
I think it's your turn next, as I've technically had the same movie twice.
Well, because I did Tron, but I would like to pick something that maybe you haven't seen, or something that so you can really sink your teeth into later. So we'll definitely be doing something in the future for sure.
Yay! Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time on Why This Film. Bye!
Bye.